The silk tablecloth smelled like bleach and expensive cigar smoke. Chloe pressed her spine against the heavy wooden pedestal, holding her breath as Jared's heavy footsteps echoed against the marble floor just outside the booth. He was looking for her. Then a pair of polished Italian leather shoes shifted inches from her knee. A large, scarred hand dropped a linen napkin to the floor. A man's face appeared in the shadows beneath the table, his voice a low, lethal hum. "Play along." The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Chloe Bennett knew this as a matter of survival, but tonight the rain was the only reason she had made it this far. She had slipped through the alley behind Laura, her cheap trench coat soaked through, her pulse hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Jared was close. She could feel the pathetic, suffocating weight of him even before she heard his voice demanding the valet hand over the keys. 3 months of silence. 3 months of changing locks, blocking numbers, and sleeping with a baseball bat propped against her nightstand. And it took one lapse in judgment, attending a co-worker's farewell dinner downtown, for him to find her. Chloe pushed through the heavy brass doors of the restaurant service entrance, the air immediately shifting from freezing drizzle to suffocating heat. The kitchen was a blur of shouting line cooks and the hiss of searing meat. Nobody stopped her. She moved with the frantic, invisible urgency of a woman running for her life. She shoved through the swinging doors into the main dining room, the sudden silence hitting her like a wall. Laura was the kind of place where a single cocktail cost a day's wages. The lighting was impossibly dim, pooling only over the center of the heavy mahogany tables. The patrons spoke in hushed, insulated murmurs. Chloe stood by the service station, her wet hair plastered to her neck, water dripping from her coat onto the imported rug. Then she heard it. "I know she came in here. Move!" Jared's voice. Whiny, entitled, yet laced with that familiar, terrifying edge of violence. He had barged through the front doors. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Chloe's veins. She scanned the room. The hostess was stepping into Jared's path, but Jared was bigger, drunker, and beyond caring about public decency. To her right lay a secluded alcove, separated from the main floor by heavy velvet curtains. The VIP section. The table was massive, draped in a floor-length white tablecloth that spilled over the edges like a heavy waterfall. There was no time to think. Survival is rarely a calculated chess move. It's usually a desperate scramble in the dirt. Chloe ducked. She scrambled on hands and knees, ignoring the sharp twinge in her torn stockings, and slid beneath the heavy drape of the VIP table. Total darkness enveloped her. The space beneath the table was a cramped, claustrophobic cavern. It smelled of spilled gin, heavy starched linen, and something else. Leather, gun oil, expensive cologne. She curled herself into a tight ball, wrapping her arms around her shins, pressing her back flush against the thick, carved wooden base of the table. She closed her eyes, trying to force her breathing to slow. Inhale for 4, hold for 4. The therapist's advice felt ridiculously inadequate while hiding like a rat under a dinner table. Above her, the heavy velvet curtain of the alcove swished open. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. But they weren't Jared's erratic, frantic stomps. These were calm, measured. The chair on the opposite side of the table scraped back. A weight settled into it, the floorboards groaning in quiet protest. 2 long legs extended beneath the table, stopping barely 6 inches from Chloe's kneecaps. They were clad in immaculately tailored charcoal wool. At the end of them were a pair of Oxfords that probably cost more than her car. Chloe stopped breathing entirely. Someone was sitting right there. She had crawled under an occupied table. If he stretched his legs even a fraction of an inch, he would kick her. If he looked down, he would see the soaked hem of her trench coat. A waiter's voice drifted down from above, smooth and trembling slightly. "Mr. Varga, your usual?" "Just the bourbon tonight, Elias," a voice replied. The voice sent a physical vibration down the wooden pedestal Chloe was leaning against. It was deep, completely devoid of inflection, and yet it carried a weight that made the air in the cramped space feel instantly heavier. It wasn't the voice of a man who raised his tone to get attention. It was the voice of a man who spoke quietly because everyone else was already holding their breath to listen. "Right away, sir. And apologies for the commotion up front. We are handling it. See that you do." The waiter hurried away. Silence fell over the alcove again. Chloe stared at the charcoal trousers, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. She had to get out. But if she crawled out now, she would have to explain herself to this man, and worse, she would be out in the open. Before she could formulate a plan, the sound of a scuffle broke out just outside the velvet curtain. "I said, I'm looking for someone!" Jared's voice was loud now, tearing through the refined quiet of the restaurant like a chainsaw. "Chloe, I know you're in here, you stupid bitch." Chloe flinched, clamping a hand over her mouth. Her eyes stung. The humiliation of it all burned just as hot as the fear. The curtain was ripped open. The brass rings shrieked against the rod. "Hey, you!" Jared barked. Above the table, the man did not move. He didn't even shift his weight. The long legs, inches from Chloe, remained perfectly still. "There's a girl," Jared panted, his voice vibrating with adrenaline. "Brown hair, cheap coat. Did she come in here?" Silence. The kind of silence that precedes a car crash. Underneath the table, Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the man to point her out, waiting for Jared to reach down and drag her out by her hair. Instead, something white fluttered down from above. A heavy linen napkin fell in slow motion, landing softly on the carpet between the polished Oxfords. The man shifted. He leaned forward. His head dipped below the edge of the tablecloth. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat. She stared into the shadows. As her eyes adjusted to the sliver of ambient light leaking in from the floor, she saw his face. He had sharp, brutal features, all harsh angles, and cold, dark eyes that looked like standing water in a basement. A thin, pale scar dragged through his left eyebrow. He didn't look surprised to see a soaking, wet woman curled around the base of his table. He looked at her the way a predator evaluates a sudden, unexpected change in the wind. He held her gaze for a split second. The panic in her wide eyes met the absolute, dead calm in his. Then he leaned in a fraction of an inch closer. "Play along," Dante Varga whispered. He sat back up before Chloe could even process the syllables. Above the table, the scrape of a glass being set down echoed sharply. The waiter had returned. Sir, you can't be in here," the waiter said, his voice dropping an octave in an attempt to sound authoritative. "This area is private." "Shut up," Jared snapped. "I asked this guy a question. Did a woman come in here?" Chloe's fingernails dug half-moons into her palms. She waited for Dante Varga to say yes, to kick her out, to call security. Instead, a slow, scraping sound vibrated through the floorboards as Dante pushed his heavy chair back. "Elias!" Dante's voice rolled over the table. It was perfectly level. "Who is this?" It wasn't a question. It was a demand for accountability. "I am so sorry, Mr. Varga," the waiter stammered, raw terror bleeding into his tone. "Security is on their way." "I don't care who he is," Jared sneered, emboldened by the alcohol and his own blind rage. "I'm looking for my girlfriend. She's sick. She's not well in the head, all right? I need to take her home." It was the lie he always used, the lie that made bystanders back off, nodding in sympathetic discomfort while he gripped her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Chloe felt a wave of nausea wash over her. It was going to work. It always worked. "Your girlfriend." Dante tasted the word like it was something rotten on his tongue. "Yeah, Chloe, where is she?" "You walked through a closed curtain," Dante stated softly. "You raised your voice in a quiet room, and you are standing on my shoes." Jared scoffed, a wet, ugly sound. "Listen, pal, I don't give a damn about your shoes, There was a sudden, sickening sound of impact, a heavy thud, followed instantly by a sharp crack and a wet gasp. Beneath the table, Chloe violently jerked, knocking her elbow hard against the wood. Jared hit the floor. He didn't fall, he dropped. One moment he was standing, and the next a heavy body collapsed against the floorboards just on the other side of the tablecloth, moaning in high, reedy gasps. "My knee!" Jared wheezed, the bravado entirely gone, replaced by sudden agonizing shock. "Jesus Christ, my knee!" "You have a fundamental misunderstanding of your environment," Dante said. The Oxford shoes hadn't moved. He hadn't stood up. The swift, brutal violence had been executed by someone else. A bodyguard, Chloe realized with a sickening lurch. Someone standing in the shadows behind Jared. "Get him off the floor, Paulie," Dante commanded quietly. "He's ruining my appetite." Heavy hands seized Jared, hauling him upward with a fabric-tearing rip. Jared let out a pathetic yelp. Wait, Jared begged, his voice cracking. "I just want my girl." "Your girl is not here," Dante said. The absolute certainty in his voice was terrifying. "And if I ever see your face in my city again, Paulie won't just take your knee, he'll take your jaw. Do you understand me?" A heavy, pregnant pause hung in the air. "Do you understand me?" Dante repeated, the volume not rising, but the pitch dropping into something monstrous. "Yes," Jared whimpered. "Yes, man. Look, I'm going. Take him out the back. Throw him in the dumpster. If he crawls out before the rain stops, break the other one." Footsteps dragged backward. The curtain swished shut. The sounds of Jared's pained whimpering faded into the bustling noise of the kitchen corridor. Under the table, Chloe was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. It wasn't the cold anymore. It was the sheer, suffocating reality of what she had just witnessed. Jared, the man who had terrorized her for 2 years, the man who made her feel entirely powerless, had been swatted away like a bothersome fly. Not with a fight, with a single word. She had escaped a domestic tyrant and crawled directly beneath the feet of an apex predator. The silence stretched. It pulled taut until Chloe felt she might snap. She stared at the charcoal trousers, waiting. "You can stop hyperventilating!" The deep voice rumbled from above. "He's gone." Chloe swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Slowly, stiffly, she uncoiled her limbs. Her joints popped in the quiet space. She reached out, grasping the edge of the heavy white tablecloth, and pulled it aside. The dim lighting of the alcove felt blinding. She crawled out, her soaked trench coat clinging to her legs, her hair a messy, matted bird's nest. She gripped the edge of the table and pulled herself up to her feet. Her knees wobbled. She stood across from Dante Varga. He was sitting back in a leather armchair, a lowball glass of amber liquid resting in his large, calloused hand. He didn't look up immediately. He took a slow sip, his dark eyes fixed on the ice clinking against the glass. Up close, the danger radiating from him was palpable. He wasn't overtly muscular, but he had the solid, immovable build of a concrete pillar. His suit was immaculate, tailored to weaponize his broad shoulders. But it was his face that kept Chloe frozen. It was a face that had seen horrible things, and perhaps caused them. The scar through his eyebrow gave him an asymmetrical, roguish cruelty. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. "You ruined a very expensive napkin," he said. Chloe looked down at her muddy, scuffed boots, then back up at the man. Her brain was misfiring, desperately trying to construct a sentence that wouldn't get her thrown in the dumpster next to Jared. I can pay for it," she rasped. Her voice sounded thin, pathetic. Dante Varga stared at her. For a long, agonizing moment, he just looked. He took in the cheap, rain-soaked coat, the bruised purple bags under her eyes, the way her hands were shaking so hard she had to clench them into fists at her sides. "Sit down," he said. "I should go," Chloe blurted out, taking a step back toward the curtain. "I need to— Thank you for what you did, but I need to go." "He's waiting for you." Chloe froze. "You told your guy to throw him in a dumpster." "I did," Dante agreed, setting his glass down. "And Trash has a habit of climbing out. He's a coward." Cowards don't attack men who can hurt them. They wait around corners for women who can't. He will wait 3 blocks down, in his car, until you walk to the bus stop. And then he will put you in the trunk. The blunt, surgical accuracy of his words hit Chloe like a physical blow. She sagged, her hand reaching out to grip the back of the empty chair opposite him. He was right. Jared wouldn't quit. Humiliation only made him meaner. "Sit," Dante repeated, gesturing to the chair. This time, she obeyed. She sank into the plush leather, feeling entirely out of place. She left a damp patch on the seat. "Elias," Dante said, not raising his voice. The waiter appeared through the curtain so fast he might have been standing right behind it. "Yes, Mr. Varga. Bring the lady a hot tea, lemon, honey, and a plate of whatever the chef is keeping for himself." "Right away, sir." The curtain closed. Dante crossed his legs, leaning his elbows on the table. He laced his fingers together. They were rough hands. A heavy gold ring sat on his right index finger, devoid of any jewel, just flat, brutal metal. "Why did you lie for me?" Chloe asked, the question slipping out before her survival instincts could stop it. Dante tilted his head. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell him where you were." "You broke his knee." "Paulie broke his knee. I merely pointed out an infraction of manners." Dante's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "I despise men who raise their voices in public places, and I despise men who hunt women like sport. He was an irritant. I removed him." "It's not that simple," Chloe whispered, wrapping her arms around her chest. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. "He doesn't stop. He'll go to the police. He won't go to the police." Dante cut her off smoothly. "Men like that have too many skeletons of their own. Besides, the police in this district work for me." Chloe stopped breathing. She looked at him, really looked at him. The expensive suit, the terrified waiter, the invisible, violent bodyguard, the casual claim of owning the precinct. "Who are you?" she breathed. "Someone who just did you a very large favor." Dante unlaced his hands and reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek, black business card and slid it across the white tablecloth. It didn't have a logo, just a phone number and a name embossed in silver. "Dante Varga. You're not from this side of the city," Dante observed, his eyes scanning her face. "You don't know the name." No. Good. Keep it that way." Dante finished his bourbon and stood up. He tossed a $100 bill onto the table to cover a drink that probably cost $50. "Drink your tea. Eat the food. My driver, Marcus." He paused, correcting himself slightly. "My driver, Elias's brother, will take you home. Give him the address. He'll make sure the street is clear." Chloe stared at the card. "I don't have money to pay you back." Dante paused at the edge of the curtain. He looked back at her over his shoulder. The dim light caught the edge of his scar, making his face look like it was carved from granite. "I don't want your money, Chloe." Her heart stopped. He hadn't asked her name. Jared had screamed it. He remembered. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dante's eyes lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than was comfortable. It wasn't a look of desire. It was a look of assessment. A man evaluating the structural integrity of a bridge he might need to cross later. "Consider it a tab," he said softly. "I'll let you know when it's time to pay." He pushed through the curtain and vanished, leaving Chloe alone in the alcove, the smell of gun oil and expensive cologne still lingering in the air, wrapping around her tighter than her own wet coat. The town car smelled like leather and quiet money. Chloe sat rigidly in the back seat, her damp coat leaving a shameful watermark on the pristine upholstery. Elias's brother, a burly, silent man named Leo, drove with the smooth, unnerving precision of a ghost. He didn't speak. He didn't ask for directions. He just drove through the slick, rain-swept streets of Seattle until he pulled up to the curb outside Chloe's apartment building. It was a decaying brick structure in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and died by midnight. "Wait here," Leo grunted. It was the first time he had opened his mouth. Chloe watched through the tinted glass as the massive man stepped out into the rain. He walked up to the entrance, disappeared into the murky lobby, and returned 3 minutes later. He opened her door. "Clear," he said. "Hallways and stairwell. Door is locked." "Thank you," Chloe whispered. She scrambled out of the car, feeling the cold rain bite at her neck again. She hurried up the stairs, her keys practically shaking out of her hands as she fumbled with the deadbolt. Once inside, she locked it. Then she threw the chain. Then she dragged the heavy oak dining chair and jammed it under the doorknob. She collapsed against the wood, sliding down until she hit the cheap linoleum floor. The silence of the apartment pressed in on her. No screaming, no shattered glass. Just the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the distant wail of a police siren. She survived, but as the days bled into a week, the survival began to feel like a stay of execution. Jared didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't show up at her office building, leaning against the hood of his truck with that sickening, predatory smirk. The absolute absence of him was worse than the harassment. It meant he was nursing a broken knee. It meant he was festering. And Jared was a man who punished people for his own pain. Every time Chloe walked to the bus stop, her eyes darted to every parked sedan. Every time the elevator chimed at work, a mid-level logistics firm where she pushed paper in the billing department, her stomach plummeted. But it wasn't just Jared haunting her. It was the black card sitting on her nightstand. Dante Varga. She had Googled the name once on a library computer, too paranoid to use her own phone. The results were terrifyingly sparse. A few articles about real estate developments, a mention on a charity board, nothing about the men with dead eyes who shattered knees in high-end restaurants. It was a sanitized digital footprint, the kind of clean that cost millions of dollars to maintain. Consider it a tab. I'll let you know when it's time to pay. On the 8th day, the paranoia broke. Chloe was walking home from the grocery store, 2 plastic bags biting into her wrists. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, the streetlights buzzing to life. She turned the corner onto her street and froze. A black Lincoln Continental was parked directly across from her building. It wasn't Leo. The man leaning against the driver's side door was tall, thin, and smoking a cigarette with sharp, agitated drags. He wore a cheap windbreaker. Jared's cousin, Seth. Chloe's lungs seized. She backed up a step, pressing herself against the brick wall of the corner bodega. Seth tossed the cigarette into the gutter and started walking across the street, his eyes fixed on the entrance to her building. He had a tire iron gripped loosely in his right hand. Chloe dropped her groceries. A jar of pasta sauce shattered, splashing red across the concrete. She spun around to run, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. She opened her mouth to scream, but a second calloused hand clamped over her lips, pulling her backward into the narrow alley beside the bodega. The smell of stale tobacco and peppermints hit her nose. "Quiet!" a raspy voice hissed in her ear. She thrashed, her elbows flying backward, connecting with a solid, unyielding chest. "Hey, stop! Look at me!" The hand on her mouth loosened just enough to let her breathe. Chloe twisted her head. It was Paulie, the invisible enforcer from the restaurant. Up close, he looked older, his face mapped with deep creases, and a nose that had been broken at least 3 times. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her out toward the street. "Your ex sent a messenger," Paulie stated, his voice a bored rumble. "He's got a limp and a piece of metal. You want to go back out there, or you want to stand still?" Chloe stopped struggling. She nodded frantically. Paulie slowly removed his hand from her mouth. "Good girl, stay in the shadows." He stepped past her, moving toward the mouth of the alley. Chloe watched in paralyzed horror as Paulie stepped out onto the sidewalk, directly in Seth's path. "You lost, kid?" Paulie asked loudly. Seth jumped, gripping the tire iron tighter. "Back off, old man. I'm looking for a bitch who lives in that building. It's family business." "Not anymore." Paulie didn't posture. He didn't raise his fists. He simply closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. Seth swung the tire iron. Paulie caught the boy's wrist with his left hand, twisted it violently until a loud pop echoed down the street and drove his right fist into Seth's solar plexus. Seth dropped the iron. He folded in half, gagging, his eyes rolling back in his head. Paulie grabbed Seth by the collar of the windbreaker and dragged him towards the Lincoln. He opened the back door, shoved the gasping man inside, and slammed it shut. He tapped on the window twice, then walked back toward the alley. He looked at Chloe, who was shaking uncontrollably against the brick wall. "Mr. Varga doesn't like loose ends," Paulie said, picking up the unshattered grocery bag from the pavement and holding it out to her. "He also doesn't like waiting. He's in the car at the end of the block. He wants to see you." Chloe looked down the dark street. Idling silently in the shadows was a sleek, black sedan. Her tab was due. The interior of the sedan was a sensory deprivation chamber. No street noise penetrated the heavy glass. The only sound was the soft hum of the climate control. Dante sat in the corner, illuminated by the faint glow of a tablet in his lap. He wore a dark navy suit today. The tie loosened slightly at his throat. He looked up as Chloe slid onto the leather seat, clutching her surviving grocery bag to her chest like a shield. "You drop your sauce?" Dante observed mildly, tapping the screen of his tablet and setting it aside. "You've been having me watched," Chloe said. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "I've been keeping you alive," Dante corrected. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in her pale face and the way she was digging her fingernails into the plastic grocery bag. "Jared is an idiot, but idiots have families. I told you, cowards don't quit. They just find someone else to hold the bat." "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why do you care? You don't know me. I hid under your table. That doesn't make me your responsibility." "It makes you an asset." Chloe blinked. The cold, businesslike word felt like a bucket of ice water. "An asset? I don't do charity, Chloe." Dante leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The faint smell of his cologne, cedar and something metallic, filled the space between them. "I run a very complicated operation. It requires precision. And right now, I have a leak in my logistics division." Chloe frowned, her fear momentarily giving way to confusion. "I don't understand." "You work at Strata Freight," Dante said. It wasn't a guess. "You process billing for the shipping containers coming out of the port of Tacoma." Her blood ran cold. He didn't just know her name. He knew her entire life. "How do you—" "I own 30% of Strata through a shell company," Dante interrupted smoothly. And someone inside the office is cooking the manifests, rerouting my shipments to a warehouse in Bellevue before they hit the final destination, skimming off the top. So fire them. Call the police." Dante let out a slow, dry exhale. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it held the same condescending weight. "The items missing from those containers are not things I can report to the police, and if I send my own men into the office to crack heads, the rat will scurry into the walls and destroy the digital paper trail before I can find out who he's working for." He reached into the console between the seats and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He dropped it onto the seat next to her. "I need someone on the inside, someone invisible, someone who already has access to the billing system, the server room codes, and the shipping manifests." He looked at her, his expression utterly blank. "I need an auditor who isn't looking for missing money. I need an auditor looking for missing cargo." Chloe stared at the folder. "You want me to spy on my company. I want you to find the discrepancy in the ledger and bring it to me," Dante said. "You have a degree in accounting. You're quiet. You sit in a cubicle all day, and nobody looks at you twice. You are perfectly unremarkable. That makes you incredibly valuable." The insult stung, but it was buried under a mountain of sheer terror. "What if I get caught? If someone is stealing from people like you, they're dangerous." "You won't get caught." Dante's voice dropped, vibrating with that absolute, lethal certainty she had heard in the restaurant. "Because you work for me now, and no one touches what is mine." Chloe swallowed hard. The possessive edge in his words made her skin prickle. "And if I refuse?" "I won't force you," Dante said, leaning back against the leather headrest. He looked out the tinted window at the rain-soaked street. "You can walk out of this car. You can go back to your apartment. But Paulie goes with me. The men watching your street go with me. And Jared's family will come back. Tomorrow, the next day, they will keep coming until they catch you slipping." It was a trap. A perfectly constructed, inescapable trap. He had saved her life just so he could hold it hostage. Chloe looked at the folder. She thought about Jared. She thought about Seth and the tire iron. Then she thought about the cold, dead look in Dante's eyes when he ordered a man's knee broken over a pair of shoes. She was trading a rabid dog for a quiet, patient wolf. Slowly, her hands trembling, she reached out and pulled the folder into her lap. "What am I looking for?" she asked. A slow, chilling smile touched the corner of Dante's mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "Good girl, open it." For the next 2 weeks, Chloe lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet, mousy girl in cubicle 4B. She drank break-room coffee, nodded at her supervisor, Mr. Henderson, and typed numbers into a spreadsheet. By night, she sat on her living room floor, surrounded by printed manifests from Dante's folder, cross-referencing them with the digital files she had quietly copied onto a flash drive during her lunch breaks. It was terrifying work. Her heart hammered every time she accessed a restricted folder on the server. If IT flagged her IP address, she was dead. Or fired. At this point, she wasn't sure which was worse. But as the days ticked by, the fear began to morph into something else. Focus. Dante had been right. She was good at this. She found the anomalies buried deep in the hexadecimal codes of the shipping logs. Someone was altering the gross tonnage of specific containers arriving from Eastern Europe. The containers were logged at 1 weight at the port, but billed for a slightly lighter weight at the warehouse. The difference meant crates were being pulled out in transit. On a rainy Tuesday, she found the common denominator. Every single altered manifest had been manually approved by the same login ID. H. Vance. Harold Vance, the regional manager of logistics, the guy with the fake tan and the leased Porsche who always stood too close to the female interns. Chloe took a picture of the screen with the burner phone Dante had given her. It was a heavy encrypted brick of a device. She typed a single text message to the only contact in the phone. "I found it." The reply came 3 seconds later. "Come down." Chloe froze. She looked around her empty apartment. She walked to the window and pushed the cheap blinds aside. The black sedan was parked across the street. She grabbed her coat, locked the door behind her, and hurried down the stairs. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. Leo was waiting by the door. He opened it, and Chloe slid inside. Dante was not in his usual suit. He wore a black turtleneck and a dark wool overcoat. He looked less like a businessman tonight and more like an executioner. "Show me," he said, holding out his hand. Chloe unlocked the burner phone and handed it to him. She explained the discrepancy, her voice steadying as she fell into the familiar rhythm of numbers and data. She pointed out Vance's login ID, the timestamps, and the specific route the trucks took where the cargo must have been offloaded. Dante stared at the screen for a long time. The pale light illuminated the thin scar through his eyebrow. "Vance," Dante murmured softly. "I play golf with him twice a year. He has a terrible slice and a very expensive wife. I should have known he was stretching his salary." He handed the phone back to Chloe. He didn't say thank you. He didn't smile. He just stared at her. "You did exactly what I asked," Dante said. "So, my tab is clear?" Chloe asked, clutching her coat tight around her chest. "Your tab for the restaurant is clear," Dante agreed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, heavy velvet box. He set it on the console between them. "But now we have a new problem." Chloe looked at the box. Her stomach dropped. "What is that?" "Vance is an arrogant man, but he isn't brave enough to steal from me alone," Dante said, his voice dropping into that quiet, dangerous register. "He's moving the product to a Russian syndicate operating out of the International District. Tomorrow night, Vance is attending a charity gala at the Rainier Club. I am also attending. I am going to have a conversation with him about his golf swing and his retirement plans. That has nothing to do with me, Chloe said, backing away slightly against the door. It has everything to do with you. Dante corrected. Vance is paranoid. He knows I suspect a leak. If I walk up to him with Paulie, he will panic, make a scene, and likely run. I need to approach him quietly. Naturally. Dante tapped the velvet box. I need to look like a man who is distracted, a man who is entirely focused on the beautiful woman on his arm. He met her eyes, and the sheer gravity in his gaze pinned her to the seat. I need a date, Chloe. No. The word fell out of her mouth immediately. No, absolutely not. I sit behind a desk. I look at spreadsheets. I don't go to mafia galas. I will ruin it. I'll panic. You won't panic, Dante said calmly. You hid under a table while a man hunted you, and you didn't make a sound. You stole data from a corporate server under the nose of a thief. You have ice in your veins, Chloe. You just don't know it yet. I don't have clothes for a gala, she stammered, grasping at straws. There is a dress in the trunk, tailored to your measurements. How do you know my measurements? Dante ignored the question. He reached over and popped the latch on the velvet box. Inside lay a diamond necklace. It wasn't flashy. It was a single, flawless teardrop stone suspended on a delicate platinum chain. It looked heavy enough to choke her. Tomorrow at 7, Leo will pick you up, Dante said. You will wear the dress. You will wear this. You will smile. You will drink champagne. And you will play along. Chloe stared at the diamond. It caught the dim light of the street lamp, fracturing it into cold, sharp splinters of light. And if I do this? She asked quietly. What happens after? Dante reached out. His large, rough hand brushed against her cheek. The touch was feather-light, completely at odds with the violence she knew he was capable of. A shiver violently ripped down her spine. After tomorrow, Dante whispered, pulling his hand back. We see if you can ever go back to being perfectly unremarkable. The dress was not a garment, it was a weapon. It hung from the velvet hanger on the back of Chloe's bedroom door, catching the ambient light of the street lamps and turning it into liquid silver. It was heavy, constructed of a bias-cut silk that felt like cold water slipping through her fingers. When she finally stepped into it, zipping it up the side, she stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. The mousy, terrified girl who hunched over spreadsheets and checked over her shoulder at bus stops was gone. The dress clung to her ribs, draped elegantly over her hips, and pooled around her ankles. It left her back entirely bare, a chilling reminder of how exposed she was. She fastened the heavy platinum chain around her throat. The diamond teardrop rested exactly at the hollow of her collarbone, feeling like a frozen thumb pressing down on her pulse. A heavy knock echoed through the apartment. Chloe grabbed a small silver clutch from the bed, her hands trembling so violently she dropped it twice before finally securing it. She opened the door. Leo stood in the hallway, massive and silent in a dark suit. He didn't blink, didn't offer a polite smile. He just turned and walked towards the stairs. Chloe followed, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the worn linoleum that sounded entirely foreign in this decaying building. The black sedan was idling at the curb. Leo opened the rear door. Dante was already inside. If he had looked like an executioner yesterday, tonight he looked like the man who owned the guillotine. His tuxedo was midnight blue, the lapels a sharp, obsidian silk. He didn't wear a bow tie. Instead, his collar was open, an arrogant rejection of the formal dress code that only a man of absolute power could afford to make. He looked up from his phone as Chloe slid into the seat. The silence in the car stretched, thick and suffocating. Dante's dark eyes moved over her, a slow, deliberate sweep that made the oxygen in the small space evaporate. He didn't look at her with the hungry, entitled leer that Jared used. He looked at her the way an appraiser examines a priceless, volatile artifact. "The dress fits," he finally said, his voice a low gravel that vibrated against the leather seats. "Your tailor is very efficient." Chloe replied. She hated how breathy her voice sounded. She cleared her throat, forcing her chin up. I read the briefing file you sent over the encrypted app. Harold is attending with his wife, Diane. They usually sit near the front. He drinks scotch. Neat. He gets loud when he wins. You did your homework, Dante murmured. I don't want to mess this up. You won't. Dante shifted, turning slightly to face her. Tonight, you are not Chloe from billing. You are Chloe, my associate. You don't know the price of anything because you've never had to look at a tag. You don't apologize when someone bumps into you. You wait for them to apologize to you. Do you understand the distinction? You want me to act entitled. I want you to act untouchable. The words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Untouchable. It was a foreign concept. Her entire life had been defined by what other people could do to her, what they could take from her. To walk into a room and assume absolute safety was a delusion. But as she looked at the cold, hard lines of Dante's profile as he turned back to the window, she realized it wasn't a delusion for him. It was a fact of gravity. The drive to the Rainier Club took 20 minutes. They pulled up to a massive, Gothic revival building constructed of dark stone and wrought iron. Paparazzi and society photographers crowded the velvet ropes, their camera flashes detonating like strobe lights in the misty Seattle air. Leo opened the door. The roar of the street hit Chloe instantly. Dante stepped out first. He didn't button his jacket. He simply stood on the curb, his presence causing a physical ripple in the crowd. The shouting photographers quieted down. A few lowered their cameras entirely. Dante Varga was not a man you photographed without permission. He turned back to the car and held out his hand. Chloe stared at the large, scarred palm. This was the threshold. If she took his hand, she was stepping out of the shadows and into a blinding, dangerous light. She would be seen with him. She would be associated with him. She placed her hand in his. His grip was incredibly warm, his fingers closing around hers with a firm, possessive strength. He pulled her gently from the car. The camera flashes erupted again, a silent, blinding assault. Dante didn't flinch. He placed Chloe's hand in the crook of his arm, his bicep feeling like carved wood beneath the fine wool of his jacket. Breathe, he muttered close to her ear, his breath brushing her skin. They are looking at you because you are the most dangerous thing in this room. Remember that. They walked up the carpeted steps and through the heavy brass doors. The interior of the Rainier Club was a sensory overload of wealth. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasting meats, and old money. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over hundreds of people dripping in jewels and tailored fabrics. A string quartet played in the corner, entirely drowned out by the low, continuous hum of arrogant conversation. Dante moved through the crowd like a shark moving through a school of reef fish. People parted for him, eyes darted towards them, lingering on Chloe with naked curiosity and disguised envy. Keep your eyes forward, Dante instructed quietly. Don't look at them. Let them look at you. Where is he? Chloe asked, keeping her voice perfectly level, surprising herself with the steady tone. By the ice sculpture, 3 o'clock. Chloe turned her head slightly. Harold stood by a massive, melting swan holding a highball glass. He was laughing too loudly at a joke someone had just told. His face flushed red beneath his artificial tan. His wife, a thin woman heavily armored in Botox and pearls, stood beside him, looking profoundly bored. What's the play? Chloe asked. Dante glanced down at her, a faint, genuine smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. The play is simple. We walk over. You smile at Diane. You distract her. I will speak to Harold. If he tries to walk away, you step in his path. Just slightly. Make it look like an accident. And if he causes a scene? He won't, Dante said, the absolute certainty returning to his voice. He is a thief, not a martyr. Let's go. The approach was agonizingly slow. Every step in the silver dress felt incredibly heavy, but Chloe forced her posture to remain rigid, channeling the untouchable aura Dante had demanded. Harold saw them coming when they were 10 feet away. Chloe watched the exact moment the alcohol drained from the logistics manager's system. Harold's ruddy complexion turned the color of old parchment. The loud, boisterous laugh died in his throat, replaced by a tight, panicked swallow. His eyes darted to the exits, a trapped rat looking for a drainpipe. But Dante was already there, his large frame blocking the most direct path to the door. "Harold," Dante said smoothly. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient noise of the gala with surgical precision. "Mr. Varga." Harold's voice cracked. He hastily switched his scotch to his left hand and wiped his sweaty right palm on his trousers before extending it. I didn't know you were attending tonight." Dante looked at the extended hand for a long, humiliating 3 seconds before finally shaking it. "I try to make time for good causes. Diane, a pleasure, as always." Diane, oblivious to her husband's sudden terror, preened under Dante's attention. "Dante, darling, it's been ages, and who is this stunning creature?" Dante's hand moved from the crook of Chloe's arm to the small of her bare back. His fingers were hot against her cold skin. "This is Chloe. She's consulting with me on a few private acquisitions." "Oh, fascinating," Diane drawled, turning her predatory gaze on Chloe. "Art? Real estate?" "Logistics, actually," Chloe said. She didn't know where the words came from, but they slipped off her tongue with a smooth, sharp edge. She looked directly at Harold. "Finding inefficiencies in complex supply chains. You'd be surprised how much dead weight accumulates when people think no one is looking." Harold choked on his own saliva. He coughed violently, raising a napkin to his mouth. "Are you all right, Harold?" Dante asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. "Fine. Swallowed wrong." Harold wheezed, his eyes wide and terrified as he stared at Chloe. He recognized her. He recognized the quiet girl from Cubicle 4B who never spoke in staff meetings. The sheer impossibility of her standing here, draped in diamonds and resting her hand on the arm of the city's most dangerous phantom, was breaking his brain in real time. "I love that diamond," Diane said, reaching out a manicured hand as if to touch the teardrop at Chloe's throat. Chloe didn't flinch. She simply held Diane's gaze, her expression perfectly blank, until the older woman awkwardly pulled her hand back. "Thank you. It was a gift." "Diane," Dante interrupted softly. "Chloe was just telling me she wanted to see the silent auction items in the West Wing. Would you be so kind as to show her the way? Harold and I need to discuss a brief matter regarding the golf tournament next month." It wasn't a request. Diane blinked, slightly taken aback by the dismissal, but the ingrained obedience of high society kicked in. "Of course. Right this way, dear." Chloe stepped away from Dante. The loss of his body heat was immediate. She offered Harold one last, dead-eyed smile, completely devoid of warmth, and followed Diane into the crowd. She didn't look back, but her entire body was strung tight like a piano wire. She listened to Diane prattle on about a vacation to Aspen, nodding mechanically, her mind entirely focused on the 2 men standing by the ice sculpture. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Chloe stood by a glass display case holding a signed football, sipping a glass of sparkling water. She scanned the crowd. Suddenly, Dante appeared at the edge of the room. He wasn't rushing, but his stride was longer, more purposeful. He caught her eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod toward the exit. "Excuse me, Diane," Chloe interrupted smoothly. "Dante is ready to leave. Thank you for the tour." She didn't wait for a response. She walked across the polished parquet floor, her silver dress flowing around her like water. She reached Dante's side, slipping her arm back through his without hesitation. "Done?" she asked quietly as they walked toward the coat check. "Done." They stepped out into the freezing night air. Leah was already at the curb, the rear door open. They climbed inside, and the heavy doors slammed shut, sealing them back in the soundproof, leather-scented vacuum. The car pulled away from the curb. Chloe let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for an hour. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the adrenaline crash hitting her fast and hard. She leaned her head back against the leather seat, staring at the ceiling of the car. "What did you say to him?" she asked, the exhaustion bleeding into her voice. "I told him his golf slice was getting worse, and he needed to spend more time practicing," Dante said, staring out the window at the passing city lights. "I told him he was retiring, effective immediately, and I told him that if he ever spoke to the Russian syndicate again, I would ensure his wife opened a very heavy box containing his head." Chloe flinched. The blunt, brutal honesty of it was jarring after 2 hours of coded society whispers. "Did he agree?" "He's booking a one-way flight to Florida as we speak," Dante replied. He turned his head to look at her. The shadows of the car hid his eyes, but the pale scar on his brow caught the light. "You did perfectly." "He recognized me," Chloe said. "He knows I'm the one who found the leak. If he tells anyone at the company—" "He won't." Dante reached over, his hand resting on the leather seat just inches from hers. "And you don't work at Strata Freight anymore?" Chloe turned her head, her brow furrowing. "What?" "I bought your contract. You submitted your resignation to HR 3 hours ago. It was accepted immediately." Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in Chloe's chest. "You can't do that. I need that job. I need the money to pay my rent, to survive. You can't just take my life away." "Your life was already gone, Chloe." Dante's voice was a low, rumbling thunder that silenced her instantly. He shifted closer, leaning into her space until the scent of cedar and metallic cold overwhelmed her senses. "You were living in a shoebox, hiding from a coward, working for a thief. That wasn't a life. That was a waiting room." Dante reached out, his rough fingers grazing the heavy platinum chain at her neck. "I told you, I don't do charity. You are an asset. You have a mind for numbers that my current accountants lack, and you have a survival instinct that can't be taught. You work for me now." "Doing what?" she whispered, unable to pull away from his touch. "Managing my ledgers, auditing my shell companies, finding the leaks before they become floods." Dante's thumb brushed the side of her throat, right over her accelerating pulse. "You will be paid 10 times what Strata gave you. You will move into a secure building downtown, owned by my firm. There will be guards at the doors. No one will ever wait in the shadows for you again." It was a gilded cage, a beautiful, terrifying, inescapable cage. "And if I say no?" Chloe asked. "If I want to walk away?" Dante slowly pulled his hand back, resting it on his knee. He looked at her, his expression utterly unreadable. "Yesterday morning, Seth, the boy with the tire iron, made bail," Dante stated quietly. "He went back to Jared's house. They got drunk. They bought a handgun from a pawn shop in Renton. They were parked 3 blocks from your office building this afternoon, waiting for you to get off work." Chloe's blood turned to ice. She stared at him, the horror rendering her entirely mute. "Where are they?" she finally managed to croak. "They had a terrible accident," Dante said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Their truck slipped off a wet logging road out near Snoqualmie Pass. It rolled down a ravine. It burned. The police suspect they were heavily intoxicated. It's a tragedy." The silence in the car was absolute. The only sound was the faint hiss of the tires on the wet pavement. He had killed them. Jared and Seth were dead. Chloe waited for the guilt. She waited for the moral revulsion, the screaming conscience that was supposed to tear her apart when she realized she was sitting next to a murderer. But it didn't come. Instead, an ugly, profound wave of relief washed over her. It was a dark, venomous feeling, settling deep in her bones. For 2 years, she had looked over her shoulder. For 2 years, she had lived with a knot of pure terror in her stomach. And now, the knot was gone. Severed by the man sitting next to her in a bespoke tuxedo, Dante was watching her face closely, reading the micro-expressions, waiting for her to break. Waiting for her to scream, or cry, or demand to be let out of the car. Chloe didn't scream. She looked down at her hands, resting in her lap against the expensive silver silk. She took a slow, deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs completely for the first time in years. "What is the first ledger you want me to look at?" she asked quietly. Dante stared at her for a long, silent moment. The corner of his mouth twitched, a shadow of a smile that finally reached his dark, standing water eyes. "We will start with the Port Authority bribes tomorrow morning," Dante said. He leaned back against the hut, entirely relaxed for the first time all night. "Welcome to the firm, Chloe." The new apartment was on the 32nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Puget Sound, the dark water churning under the relentless grey sky. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and cold. There were no worn floorboards, no flickering streetlights outside the window, and there was no chair jammed under the doorknob. Chloe stood by the glass, holding a mug of black coffee, watching the ferries cut through the fog. It had been 3 weeks since the gala, 3 weeks since Jared's truck had been pulled from the ravine in Snoqualmie Pass. The local news had run a 30-second segment on it, entirely dismissing it as a tragic DUI. Her old life was entirely erased. She spent her days in a corner office on the top floor of a high-rise downtown, a building that belonged to the Varga Corporation. Her desk was a massive slab of polished mahogany. She had 3 monitors displaying banking routes that snaked through the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Switzerland. She was exceptionally good at it. The survival instinct that had kept her alive in the alleyways translated perfectly into navigating Dante's financial labyrinth. She spotted the traps. She found the hidden margins. Behind her, the heavy oak door of her office clicked open. She didn't jump. She didn't flinch. She simply took a sip of her coffee and turned around. Paulie stood in the doorway, looking entirely out of place among the glass and steel architecture. He held a thick manila envelope in his calloused hand. "Boss wants you to look at this." Paulie grunted, tossing the envelope onto her desk. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "What is it?" Chloe asked, walking over to the desk. "Real estate acquisitions in the South End," Paulie said. He lingered for a moment, his battered face unreadable. "Some of the numbers are bleeding. Boss thinks the contractor is double billing for materials and kicking it back to a rival crew." Chloe picked up the envelope. It was heavy. "Tell him I'll have an answer by 4 o'clock. Paulie nodded slowly. "You're getting comfortable in that chair, kid." "Is that a problem, Paulie?" The older man snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Not for me. But you keep finding money for him, he's going to keep trusting you. And in this life, trust is a heavy anchor. It drags you down deep." Paulie turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. Chloe sat down in her leather chair. She opened the envelope and spread the spreadsheets across her desk. The numbers immediately began to organize themselves in her mind, forming a picture of greed and stupidity. The contractor was clumsy. He was hiding the inflated material costs in the concrete orders, a glaringly obvious discrepancy if you knew how to calculate the cubic yardage required for the foundation blueprints. She flagged the fraudulent invoices, compiling a neat, undeniable report. At exactly 3:55 p.m., the internal phone on her desk chimed. A single red button flashed. The direct line. "Yes?" she answered. "Bring it up," Dante's voice replied, followed immediately by the dial tone. Chloe gathered the printed report, slipped it into a leather portfolio, and walked to the private elevator at the end of the hall. It required a retinal scan to access the penthouse level. The doors opened into a massive space that looked more like a fortress than an office. Dark wood, heavy leather, and absolute silence. Dante stood behind his desk, his back to the door, staring out at the city skyline. "It's the concrete supplier," Chloe said without preamble, walking forward and dropping the portfolio onto his desk. "They're padding the invoices by 22%. The contractor approves it. They split the margin. You're bleeding roughly $40,000 a week on the South End development." Dante didn't turn around immediately. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. You found that in 3 hours, he noted softly. They were sloppy. They used the same inflated percentage across 4 different sites. A simple cross-reference algorithm caught it. Dante finally turned. He was wearing a stark white shirt, the sleeves rolled up past his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded, jagged tattoos. The harsh daylight caught the brutal angles of his face. He walked around the desk, stopping just inches in front of her. He didn't look at the portfolio. He looked down at her. 40,000 a week, Dante murmured. What do you suggest I do about it? It was a test. It was always a test with him. A month ago, Chloe would have said, fire them, or call the police. But she wasn't that girl anymore. That girl died the night she crawled under a tablecloth to escape a man who meant to break her. You don't fire them, Chloe said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his. If you fire them, you have to find a new contractor, which delays the build, which costs more than the 40,000. You pull the contractor into a quiet room. You show him this file. You demand the stolen money back with interest, and then you force him to finish the job for cost. He works for free until the building is done. Dante stared at her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, with a dangerous electricity. He reached up, his rough fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was burning hot. I created a monster, he whispered, a dark, terrible pride swimming in his eyes. No, Chloe replied, refusing to back away from his touch. You just stopped me from being prey. Dante's hand slid down, his thumb resting against the erratic pulse at the base of her throat, right where the diamond teardrop used to sit. He leaned in, his mouth hovering just an inch from hers. Prey runs, Dante murmured, his voice a low, lethal hum that vibrated straight through her chest. Predators stay and fight, and you, Chloe, you are entirely done running. He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to. The ownership was absolute, signed not in ink, but in blood and ledgers. Chloe closed her eyes, leaning slightly into his hand. The silk tablecloth, the smell of bleach, the terror. It was a lifetime away. She was in the dark now, but for the first time in her life she wasn't afraid of it. She was part of it, from hiding under a table in a cheap coat to orchestrating the downfall of mafia rivals from a glass penthouse. Chloe's transformation is absolute. She traded a pathetic abuser for a lethal kingpin, and instead of becoming a victim, she became the apex predator's secret weapon. Dante didn't just save her, he handed her the keys to his dark kingdom. Do you think Chloe will eventually overthrow Dante, or will they rule the underworld together? Let me know your predictions down in the comments. If you want more intense, dark romance stories, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends.